to be a good citizen, I've got to be able to articulate my thoughts and stand up and speak. There truly was this feeling in the air that if you have problems standing up speaking, if you have problems with public speaking, you need to get some help, because you can't be a good citizen if you don't. And there was like this sense of responsibility. So what happened? These schools of rhetoric started popping up in ancient Greece. And if you can remember back to your freshman English class, your rhetoric and calm, your English teacher probably didn't tell you that what those schools of rhetoric really were. They were like public speaking schools. That's really what they were doing. They were teaching people how to stand up and deliver, articulate a message clearly. And the cool thing is, fast forward 2,500 years later, we're still teaching many of the same principles. They're time tested, they're true, they work. So let's talk about some of those principles. Any time that you are standing in front of a group of people to deliver, I don't care if it's 3 people sitting around a boardroom table or it's an auditorium full of thousands of people. Anytime you're asked to stand up in front of people and speak, I think you should ask yourself this question. Why am I here? And I mean that on several levels. Why am I here? Let's take care of the obvious meaning of that question in this context. Tell me, what do I mean by that? Asking yourself, okay, why am I here?
What's your purpose?
What's my purpose? What do I want to accomplish today? What do I want these people to get out of my message? What is my message? Obviously, you have to ask yourself that. But more importantly to me, because that's kind of a given, I've got a sort of a unique way for you to ask yourself this question. Why am I here? Why am I standing up in front of these people talking to them? There are a lot of ways to communicate. I could have given your professor a written, brilliant essay about what I'm going to talk about today and said, you give this to them and they can read it on their own time. But we chose not to do it that way. We chose to communicate in a different mode, which is me standing up in front of you. Why?
It's more effective.
It's more effective. Why is it more effective? Absolutely, I agree. Why is it more effective, though?
I think it's because we're seeing it and we're hearing it versus just reading it.
Right.
You read a lot of stuff and you don't really take it in.
It's multi-dimensional, absolutely. Yeah. So what are some of the more specific advantages that I have by virtue of standing in front of you? Yes, sir.
You can get that one-on-one attention from the
Right.
other.
I mean, I can look at you and I can look at your eyes, and I can see how you're taking this. You can ask a question. You can stop me and ask a question, or say, "Could you repeat that?" Now, of course, if you're reading, you could always reread. But what are some of the other differences between delivering a message through reading and standing up alone?
You can also portray like what emotion you're trying to get off when you're presenting instead of reading.
And that's huge. I think you can have a passion in writing, certainly, but not quite like life. You can use your voice, flexion of your voice. You can use your body language. You can fuse your voice with a little more energy, like, hey, I want you to get this. You can ask people questions and have them respond so you can get an idea how they're getting it. There are so many, if you think about it as little, sort of like tools in a toolkit, so many tools that you can use when you're standing up in front of people communicating with them that way as opposed to in writing. And what I'm suggesting to you is that you've got to think about that. What can I use here to reach my message, reach my audience? A nice quote from you from one of my favorite authors, Gar Reynolds. He says, unfortunately, most presenters prepare their talks only by gathering information and facts. They never frame the purpose of their talks in terms of impacting a change in the audience. I think that's your primary advantage of having this live moment of standing in front of people. You can impact your audience in a way that you just can't in writing. So don't forget that. Don't just stand up here and kind of be boring and sort of read your slides to people. What's the point? You might as well send it in and let them read it. It'd probably be more effective. So it's almost like a wasted opportunity. You have the opportunity to impact people by standing in front of them, showing them a little bit of your passion, convincing them a little bit more of why this is important. So don't forget that. I think that's kind of like the first principle of effective speaking. So let's look at some specific tips, some of which you've seen before, maybe all of which you've seen before, but I hope to present them to you in a new light, a new way of thinking about these things. One, I think you've got to think about this. You've got to communicate with clarity. You guys are welcome to take notes, but you will. I will make these slides available to you, so you'll have everything on the slides. And what I mean by that is you've got to be clear. I mean, your audience has got to get an understanding of what it is you're talking about clearly. We sometimes get so wrapped up in our own heads, and our own agenda, and our own topics that we don't think about the fact that are they getting it or not. And the worst thing you want is for you to stand up in front of a group, speak for a while, and sit down, and half the people in the audience are thinking, I have no idea what that was all about. I don't even know what he was talking about. You've got to be clear. I mean, the point is communication. The point is not for you to speak. A colleague of mine talks about his son was in Little League, and his son was pretty advanced, could throw the ball. Let's say they were 8 years old, he could throw the ball like an 11 or 12-year-old. And he was real proud of himself. And the problem is, the other kids weren't catching it because they're scared of it. He could throw it really hard, and they were shying away from it, not catching it. And this guy was, full of disdain for his teammates. His coach pulled him aside and he said, "Son, what's the point of you throwing the ball?" He said, "Coach, what's the point?" He couldn't really answer the question. He said, "Son, the point of you throwing the ball is for the other guy to catch it. And if you're throwing it in a way that they're not catching it, then the problem is you." And he was just appalled. "What do you mean? I'm a great thrower of the ball." No, it's not how you throw it. It's whether they're catching it or not. So be clear. Make sure to tailor your message to this audience in a way that they're getting it. That's the key, right? And so you've got to be aware, for example, of the curse of knowledge. The curse of knowledge is we forget what it's like to not know what we know. You know this? Have you ever experienced this? I see it in my daughter, my 11-year-old daughter. She'll learn about something, and a week later she'll be talking to one of her friends who doesn't know this, and she'll act like, "Everybody knows that. Why don't you know that?" She's forgotten that only a week before she didn't know it. We do this all the time. And professors have this disease, by the way. Because we have all this knowledge, we've been working for years, talking to students for years, and sometimes we forget what you guys don't know. We take it for granted. And you've got to be careful with that. And that's just another way of saying tailor your message to your audience, be aware of who they are, how to speak to them in this moment in a way that they'll get it. You've got to be organized, and not only be organized with a flow, does it make sense? You can look at it sort of in an outline form, but also you've got to convey organization. How do you convey organization to your audience?
Don't stumble on your words, like know what you're talking about.
Okay.
Have a good flow between transitions.
Yeah, but I mean, what you guys are saying though is to be organized. How do I convey that organization to you?
You can like show it in your slides and stuff, like not cram a bunch of stuff in the slides, but kind of have like, what do you say, like kind of a flow to your...
Notice how I'm rolling these bullets in as I talk about them? You guys have to stay with me. You can't read ahead, for example. I didn't give you my slides ahead of time. You don't know where we're going. If you're going to pay attention, if you're interested, you've got to listen to me. And I'm showing you, I'm demonstrating the flow by doing it that way. You have to have logical transitions. Be aware that, okay, we're moving to another topic now. Sometimes people aren't quite with you. They're a little behind, so you've got to kind of stop in a transition. If you're in a team situation where you have a team presentation, those transitions between speakers are very important. You've got to stop and really slow down at that moment and have a clear transition. Occasionally you can stop and ask questions, make sure people are with you. You can kind of reiterate what you've done. Okay, so far we've done X, Y, and Z, now let's move on to A, B, and C. Whatever, I kind of got that backwards, didn't I? Keep it simple. Often what happens is we almost like we want credit for everything we've done. And so we get up here and we just tell everybody about everything and throw it all in the power. It's almost like but I did all this work, I want credit for it. But another thing that Gar Reynolds talks about, the author of Presentation Zen, a book we'll talk about today, is amplification through simplification. That you can amplify your key messages by simplifying them. And in fact, if your key messages are buried with a lot of other superfluous stuff, your message is getting watered down. So we normally think of it maybe as dumbing down or something, but the reality is the more simple your message, your key message, the more effective it's going to be, the more clear it's going to be. And just remember, clarity is king. Number 2, speak naturally. Don't speechify. This is one that's really important to me. By the way, I'm not here to talk about writing, but it's also important with respect to writing, I think. We have this tendency to just talk in a natural way, and then we sit down and write, and it sounds very stilted. Writing is very different than our speech, and it should be different in some ways, but it should capture the natural rhythm of the human voice talking. In the same way, I see a lot of my students who, great conversationalists, one-on-one or talking to a small group, but they get up to deliver in this mode, and they break into speech mode, and they get very stiff. It's like, oh, now I'm giving a speech. You know, even in a more formal setting, people appreciate it if you just talk to them. You just talk to people. You have a sort of in a conversational voice, a way that's natural, not some stiff, I'm giving a speech manner. Does this make sense to you? And you know those presenters? Or have you been guilty of that yourself? Kind of broke into speech mode and got real stiff? Try to relax. I mean, there's a lot we'll talk about today, some ways that you can relax. But try to relax and think of this as, no, I need to speak naturally. I need to talk to these people. I need to have a conversation with them. I'm not going to deliver a speech. Related to that is this one. Making eye contact. Have you heard this one? It's good in a presentation. You've got to make eye contact, right? I think that can be really bad advice. Now, why in the world would I say that?
Because you kind of like lose focus when you're just kind of looking at someone, or
Yeah.
it breaks your concentration.
Well, absolutely. Let me ask it this way. When you guys are sitting around the table talking to each other, or you're out there in the hall and you run into each other and you have a conversation, where do you look? Do you look at your shoes or up in the air? No. Human beings, when they interact with each other, we look at each other. We look at each other's eyes. That's what we do, right? That's our natural mode of communication. So why would you stand up in front of a group of people and look down at the floor, or look over their heads, or stare at the screen the whole time? In other words, what I'm saying is, rather than some sort of mechanical, must make eye contact kind of stiff thing, if you would just speak naturally to people, just speak naturally, then you will naturally look at them. And so it's not something you're thinking about like, must make eye contact. Instead you're thinking, I just want to talk to these people. And that will happen naturally. One of the things I don't think I've got in the presentation today, you must see yourself presenting multiple times. You've got to videotape yourself presenting. There's nothing like it, because you will swear things like, no, I made eye contact the whole time, and you'll watch on video and you're standing there talking like this, or up here. And I've had students say to me, oh no, Krajicek, I did it this time. Okay, let's watch it. And I watch them go, oh man. So you've got to develop that awareness. But again, if you just, instead of kind of ticking off these mechanical list of things that I must do, like make eye contact, if you just think of it in terms of, I want to be natural. I just want to be natural and talk to these people. Then the eye contact's going to happen. I think it's very important in most business settings, I would never say all, but in most business settings, to give your answers up front. You want to start off by kind of giving the payoff. It's not a mystery novel. You know, you don't want to ask your audience to sit there the whole hour thinking, where are we going? I'm not sure where we're going with this. Let them know what this is about. If you have, I tell my students who maybe they've done a case analysis and they've got an audience that they're going to talk about the case analysis, tell them right away your sort of thesis, your conclusions. Here's what I think we should do. Point A, B, and C. Now let's back up and let us explain why. And the reason for that is then your audience already knows, they're oriented with your answer, they know where you're going with it, and from that point on they hear every word in the context of where you're going. They're not just sitting there wondering. So I think, especially in the business world, people want to know up front, why are we here? What's the point? Get to the point. Okay, now if it's interesting, it's nuanced, okay, maybe I'll have some patience to listen to the details. But let me know up front. It's important in business writing as well. Now this is one of my favorites. People seem to think that these two terms are mutually exclusive. Like you can't be professional and enthusiastic at the same time. You can't. In fact, you better. You better. The worst thing you can do, is stand up in front of a group of people and say, I've got to be in professional mode, now I'm giving a speech, and you get very boring and monotone and stiff. No, 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 no.